Hello and welcome to the 12 Months Marathon Podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams, episode 86, 18-mile marathons and charity places. So what's going on with me at the moment? I am just coming to the end of week 12 of my marathon training cycle for my marathon in Boston, Lincolnshire here in the UK on April the 12th. Feeling okay, had a bit of a cold for 3 weeks, which has hindered my faster pace work as it's affected my aerobic capacity. But overall, I've been hitting my weekly mileage and I'm really pleased. Usual stuff with marathon training when you're nearly 50. I'm tired, I'm hungry all the time. And the doubts are creeping in occasionally about whether or not I've still got this in me. But that makes me human and that makes you human if those doubts are cropping up for you as well. So please forgive yourself if that's happening. So I wanted to talk about, because I'm part of the problem, I wanted to talk about some of the things that have come out recently in the running community and that have been discussed online and give my overview of this. And I want to be as honest as I possibly can because a lot of people listen to this for sort of inspiration and motivation, and I think this might help you a little bit. So a couple of things that have been happening recently. So there's three major things that have been talked about in the running community online this week. The first one is the LA Marathon, offering runners the chance to come off the course at 18 miles and still get a medal because of the heat. The second one is somebody who posted about the New York City Marathon and not getting in and because of their pace when charity runners get in, and whether or not charity runners should get in over people who qualify through times. And then the third thing is, should races ban filming? Now, I don't know if I'll have time to talk about all three. I do want to give my opinion on this because I think there's a broader issue here for me with this whole thing. If you haven't heard about any of this stuff, fair play to you, by the way. You're doing well, as in you're not really on social media, particularly if you've not heard about these things. But I wanted to talk about the broader issue, I think, first, which is I don't think that running should have any sort of political or I support the latest thing angle to it. And what I mean by that is that for me, running should be an escape from the world in a way, if that makes sense. It's not therapy. It shouldn't be a replacement for therapy, as the lad said on last week's podcast, as Richard said on last week's podcast, which I thought was very good. So it shouldn't be something that we use to mask our problems, as it were, but it's something that I think helps us deal with life better. So a wonderful expression I once heard was, exercise doesn't solve your problems, it just gives you better ones. And I think running fits into that category as well. So I think running is a form of escapism from the world at large, from, what's going on in your head and so on and so forth. Again, another expression I heard once, which was, exercise is a good way to get out of your body and get out of your head and get into your body. So get out of your head and get into your body. And I think that's really good. So I think first and foremost, I think running should be that. I don't think we should use running as any tool for political measure or anything like that, because I don't think it's for that. And what I've also noticed is, particularly when you go into people who've got bigger followings, potentially sometimes there's that urge to sort of let your affiliations to certain things creep in when people don't follow you for that. They follow you for running advice and inspiration, because I think the problem is, as I see, is people will say things like, oh, we should talk about politics. What they actually mean is you should talk about the politics that I agree with. And that's, for me, that's not compassionate. You've got to understand that everybody's doing the best with the resources they have available. And, if we care for our fellow man, and that wonderful quote by Mother Teresa, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family, I think rings true here. So that's, for me, the bigger issue at large. We shouldn't make running like politics, like religion, things that really cause arguments and are really binary online, because I don't think it should be for that. And I'm not talking about discussing and debating different types of running styles, different types of approaches, all that sort of thing. That's normal. That should be done. But when things border into like arguments that you would associate with, say, politics, I think we've got a bit of a challenge there. And I think we all need to take the lead on that. And I noticed this when I did a podcast on Zone 2, and there was posts on Instagram where the comments had been turned off because people were calling each other idiots and arguing about a running style, which I think is absurd. That's just me. So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, I think so. Let's talk about the two things. So firstly, let's go for the 18-mile marathon. Now, there's a bigger issue again at play here for me, which is, I think, if the reason why they did that was because of the heat. It was due to be very hot. And I think there's a bigger question here, which is, When I've done two relatively hot marathons, which was my first one and then my third, I think, in Paris, which were both quite hot. Now, there's a conversation about safety here, because if you look at the elites, I remember London Marathon 2018, I think it was 2018, which I didn't do, which was one of the hottest ones ever. I think it was like 26, 27 degrees. And the elites were like a minute slower, 30 seconds slower, but a lot of other people struggled. And I think there is a question about safety, and there is a question about that, about what do you do in that situation, because I remember the guys who did 2025 London and Manchester here in the UK, a lot of people that I worked with at that point were doing those two marathons in my coaching program, and they did struggle in the heat. And there's only so much you can do on the day to try and negate that. There's only so much water you can drink. There's only so many hoses you can have at the side of the road. There's only so much ice you can put over your head and things like that. So I think there's a safety issue at play here. But what I don't think is appropriate is, I think if you are focusing on you, then you shouldn't worry about what other people do. Because if I was doing a really hot marathon, and I've done a couple, and it was me now, so I was perhaps going at a time or trying to look for a time, I would have to accept to a certain degree that I perhaps wouldn't be able to perform at the level that I could if it was a normal temperature or a cooler temperature for the time of year where these marathons normally are. So I think there's a level of acceptance there. If somebody wants to come off at 18 miles and still get a medal, that's their choice. And it's not their fault that this marathon has said that. And also as well, I always go back to the example of, and this is a bit of a strange example, but I'll give it, is like, people complain about the amount of plastic in the ocean, yet there's 50 different types of mineral water in the shops. Well, the problem is the fact that there's too much choice and there's too many products. Yes, if there's less products, there's less problem. Yes, the humans have to take a personal responsibility angle on that, but of course, if you give people the tools to do something, you know, you're making it a lot harder and a lot easier for them to act in that way. So I think if the marathon have said you can come off at 18 miles, well, of course people are going to do that. Of course people are going to say, I came off at 18 miles and got a medal. I remember I did the Birmingham Half Marathon here a couple of years ago, and it was because of safety reasons, it was cut 2 miles short, and the T-shirt had 13.1 miles on it. The medal had 13.1 miles on it. And there were people getting pictures at the end, and it was a shame because, of course, they didn't do 13.1 miles. But what do you do? It's not your fault. So on that, I would say it's not the individual's fault, and it's not the participant's fault that they reduced it to 18 miles. The bigger conversation is regarding safety around heat on marathons in general for general population running, and whether or not that's a conversation to have. But that's above and beyond my remit. But I would say if somebody wants to run an 18-mile marathon and get a medal, that's their choice. What do you want to do? And that's what it comes down to. And I think that's the other broader issue at play here of, let's look at the bigger message, which is just focus on you. So this will lead me nicely into the next point around the charity places. Now, somebody makes a post, call it misguided, whatever you want to say. But what it actually was, which is what a lot of runners think with their unconscious, is a little bit of frustration. Okay, and the frustration is, I did a good for age time and I didn't get into this marathon, but then all these quote unquote slower runners, whatever that means, doing charity runs, they got in. I should get in over them. And what you actually find is, if you sat everybody down in a room, everybody could sit there and probably come up with a case why they should be doing that marathon versus the other person, which means that nobody wins in the end. For me, we shouldn't be criticising anybody for doing anything. What we look at is the marathon majors. And as a runner, and as a marathon runner, I have to accept where I'm sat here now with my particular situation in my life, I couldn't go and do the majors, okay? Because I've got to get in, first and foremost. I've got to go around the world. You know, these things are not only time consuming, they're expensive. And if you judge your marathon success based on whether or not you get into all the majors, you're going to have a problem. I live in the UK. I'm very fortunate to have done London twice. One was a charity place, one was a good for age. Would I get that again? I don't know. I wouldn't. Perhaps charities are very, very difficult because it's incredibly hard to raise money. So what people need to realise is, if you're criticising, if you do say for example, your good for age time, when I did it, I think my good for age time was 3:03, I think, and I got a 2:56. So I was well underneath. Fantastic. That didn't guarantee me entry. Now that's hard. Doing a 2:56 marathon at 45 is hard. But also raising £3,000 is hard. And in some of these marathons, like on my interview with Christina Coccoluto, who's been very vocal on this, of course, because she's raised a lot of money for the causes that she represents, they had to raise $10,000 just to get into Boston. And here in the, I mean, I raised the thick end of £2,500, and that was in 2014, and that was hard for me to do. And one of the only reasons why I hit the numbers I did was because, unfortunately, my mum passed away 9 weeks before the marathon, so of course more people sponsored me. I don't know what would have happened if that hadn't have happened, because I don't know whether I'd hit the target. It's very, very hard to do, and there are actually people out there who just get a charity place, and because they've got the means to do it, they just pay the money themselves. They'll literally pay £3,000 to go and do a big marathon because they've got the means to do it. And that shows you that that's fine, by the way, because that's the system. And this is the point that I made, particularly on Instagram. Don't forget to follow me at 12 Months to Marathon. That's what we're working with. That's the system. And it's always going to be that way. And as the majors particularly get bigger and more majors are added, I think Shanghai's now going into the final stages of the process. There is this almost, even if it's unintentional, let's see who can get the most participants thing going on. And that's great in one sense, but also, number one, it causes a problem for most runners who want to get into these things and struggle. And secondly, there are some safety potential issues there, which we can talk about, particularly with the heat and so on and so forth, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So I guess talking to the average person, it's saying, well, don't let your marathon experience be dictated by the majors. I like doing marathons, I must admit. I like doing the big marathons. I'm very, very fortunate to do London. I've done it twice. The first time was just after my mum died. It was hot. I wasn't prepared right. So it wasn't the best experience. So I was lucky to go back and do it again in 24 and actually have a proper experience. No phone, no music, took in all the sights. It was brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it. I've also done Manchester here in the UK 4 times, which is another great run, well supported, good course. These things are good runs. So don't ever let the fact that you're not going to get into the majors let you become bitter, because you can go and do other ones, and they do all count. And the thing is, if you are in that bracket of you're trying to qualify, particularly good for age, right? Let's look at the good for age qualifications. Then you might just have to work a bit harder and just get a bit faster. Because when I applied for my good for age for London, it was more on a whim. I thought, I did a 2:56. That's a good time for my age. Let's see if that gets me in. And literally, I wasn't intending to do it. It was just on a whim, and I got in, ironically. It's like the people who apply for the ballot on a whim and get in for these runs, or the lottery, as it's called in other places. So I think we've got to accept that that's the way it works. And there are ways and means to get in. You can get in through a charity, but that comes with a trade-off, which is raising the money, which is hard. And, is that harder than running a fast marathon? It's an arguable point. Do you understand? This is my point about everybody that sat there in the room talking about who's got it more difficult getting into these marathons. What I would say from my point of view is you have to have a level of acceptance and accept that this is the way it is, and this is always the way it's going to be. And these majors are just going to be beyond some people. There are people out there who've got the means, financially, time, connections, whatever it might be, to just go and enter them all and do them all. And that's the way it works. It's like anything in life. But don't let it diminish your marathon ambitions. Don't let it diminish your approach to marathons, or the fact that you could ever do one. Because if you've never done one and you'd like to do one, my advice would be don't hold out for the majors. Go and do one. There are loads that I've done some great ones. I've done Loch Ness here in the UK. I've done Edinburgh, both good runs. Manchester's a good run. Chester here in the UK is a good run. I've done Florence. I've done Paris. Florence is a great one. There are marathons all over the world that you can do that will give you a fantastic experience, but won't necessarily be the majors. And who knows, if you keep doing those marathons and you maybe want to improve your time and get a bit faster, you might give yourself a chance of getting a good for age, because I've got one and it is possible. So the key message I want you to take away from today, before I go off too much on this one, is be nice to each other, because we as a community have the opportunity to bring people together. And I've noticed that there is nothing more inspiring and nothing more reaffirming about the goodness of humanity than going to a big race. I promise you see some amazing people. I've met some amazing people through this podcast and interviewing people who've done incredible things. So let's just be nice to each other, and let's remember that there is an easy way for us to be inclusive, which is just to be nice to everybody who runs, and to be nice to everybody in general. But in our running community, let's just be nice to each other. Let's not argue about silly things. Let's accept things the way that they are, and let's support each other to make sure that this sport reaches more people, because we can do that. And just because you don't do the majors doesn't mean you're not a marathon runner, because I've only done one. And I've got ambitions and goals, but I also have something in me that says I have to accept that this might not be possible, and that's okay. So be nice, be kind, have acceptance, use some common sense, and let's support each other. And on that note, I'll finish for this week. So, talking about support, please feel free to go hop over and follow me at 12 Months to Marathon. That's appreciated. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, Spotify or Apple. That's appreciated. If you want to drop me a review on Spotify, that's really useful as well. Drop me a star review and a comment. That's also helpful. And share this with your friends online. If you hop over to Instagram again, at 12 Months to Marathon, you can go to my bio. There's a link there where you can join my free online running community for the over 35s, where we can take you away from the noise of social media and we can connect away and talk through things and give you some support and accountability in a fantastic community of people. So thank you very much for listening as always. I do appreciate it, and I'll speak to you all again very soon indeed.